Hello students, I am Dr. Amit Bhatnagar, working as Senior Research Officer in the Department of Agronomy at GB Pant University of Agriculture and Technology, Pantnagar, Uttarakhand. In this lecture, I will tell you about the weed index, what is weed index and how it is related with the wheat, and what is the meaning of this weed index and how it is calculated. When we talk about weed index, we think about the weed that it is related with the weed density or weed population. It is not like that. The first important thing is that weed index is not directly related to weed density, means number of weeds per unit area, per square meter, per square uh, 10 square meter or 2 square meter. What is the weed population or weed density? It doesn't give any idea about the weed population and weed density, and it not indicate about the dry matter accumulation by weeds. Name is weed index, so we think that it has some relation with the weed. It is not like that. तो वीड इंडेक्स से हमें ये नहीं पता चलता कि 1 स्क्वायर मीटर में या 2 स्क्वायर मीटर में पर यूनिट एरिया में कितने वीड्स हैं या उनकी क्या डेंसिटी है या वीड ड्राई मैटर एक्यूमुलेशन कितना हुआ है. ऐसा हमें कुछ भी वीड इंडेक्स से पता नहीं चलता है. तो डोंट बी कंफ्यूज्ड दैट वीड इंडेक्स गिव्स सम आइडिया और टेल्स अबाउट समथिंग weed population. It is not like that. This is very important to know that weed index is not related with the weed dry matter or weed population. It is not like that. Another important is that it says about the weed infestation or weed competition. It is indirectly linked with. Actually, value is different, but with the value of weed index, we can make some idea about the weed infestation. What is the weed competition? Whether weed competition is low, severe or moderate. And this weed index value is directly related with the weed competition. And suppose weed index value is 10%, 20% or 30%. As the weed index value is increasing, it means the weed competition is increasing. If weed index value is high, it means competition is also high. So it is directly related with the weed infestation. So high value or more value of weed index tells about the competition. If weed competition is high, definitely weed index value will be high, but the calculation is different. This weed index is not calculated with the help of weed dry matter or weed population. So there is no need of weed density. If we want to calculate weed index, then there is no need of weed density or weed dry matter or weed population. अगर हमको weed index calculate करनी है तो हमको weed dry matter की जरूरत नहीं होती है, weed population की जरूरत नहीं होती है, या कितने नंबर ऑफ weeds पर यूनिट एरिया है, पर स्क्वायर मीटर है, इसकी जरूरत नहीं होती है. But with the help of weed index value, we can make idea about the competition. So if weed index value is low, suppose 2%, 3%, 4%, then we can say that weed competition is low. As the weed index value increases, it means weed competition is increasing. तो high value अगर weed index की है तो इसका मतलब यह है कि वहां weed competition ज्यादा है. लेकिन ये weed index weed dry matter से या weed की population से calculate नहीं होती है. This weed index is calculated with the help of the yield. Whatever the yield in the treated plot, it will decide the weed index. How it is calculated, we will learn. And this yield is compared, treatment yield. Treatment may be atrazine, treatment may be any herbicide, pendimethalin, treatment may be hand bedding, treatment may be intercropping, treatment may be intercultivation. So treatment may be different type of treatment which are used for weed management or to control the weeds. So what is the yield in a particular treatment is compare the yield with weed free crop. So if we want to know what is the weed index, so we have to maintain crop without weed free. So without weed free crop, we cannot calculate weed index. So it is must, it is necessary to have a plot which is weed free. So how we keep a weed free plot? So we make grow the crop, make plot. For example, there are 3 plots, and in this plot, suppose we are using pendimethalin, and in this plot we are using suppose atrazine, and this is kept weed free. Means we apply atrazine in this plot atrazine, and third plot whenever weed emerge we remove the weeds. So maybe 3 hand bedding or 4 hand bedding. It doesn't depend upon the number of hand bedding. Our objective is to keep weed free crop so that competition is zero. The objective behind the weed free crop is that the maximum yield. What would be the maximum yield that is obtained by weed free crop? तो हम वीड फ्री इसलिए रखते हैं ताकि वहाँ कंपटीशन वीड्स का जीरो हो और जो मैक्सिमम यील्ड आ सकती है उसको हम ऑब्टेन कर सकें. और उस यील्ड को हम किससे कंपेयर करते हैं? जिस ट्रीटमेंट की या जिस हर्बिसाइड की हम वीड इंडेक्स को जानना चाहते हैं. तो इन वीड कंट्रोल एक्सपेरिमेंट्स और इन ट्रायल इट इज नेसेसरी to have weed free crop if we want to know weed index. So without weed free crop it is not possible to calculate weed index. So weed index is calculated with the yield of the treated plot and it is compared with the weed free crop, and value may be 0 to 100. The weed index may be 0 or maybe 100%. If 0% weed index is 0%, it means the treated plot, means treatment in which treatment is imposed, whether it is pendimethalin, atrazine, butachlor, 2,4-D, whatever we are using weed control treatment. Then if weed index is 0, it means treated plot has equal yield with the weed free crop. इसका मतलब जो treatment जो हमने impose किया है crop में, जो हमने herbicide डाला है, उसकी yield weed free crop के बराबर है. Then value is 0. If it is 100% weed index, इट मीन्स ग्रेन यील्ड इन ट्रीटेड प्लॉट इज जीरो. कि जो ट्रीटमेंट हमने लिया है उसमें ग्रेन यील्ड क्या है? जीरो है. तो इट इज नॉट पॉसिबल. बोथ द वैल्यूज आर नॉट पॉसिबल. जीरो में भी पॉसिबल. जीरो देयर इज चांस दैट वीड फ्री क्रॉप यील्ड एंड ट्रीटेड प्लॉट यील्ड इज इक्वल. ऐसा हो सकता है कि हमने मेज में टेम्बोट्राइन डाला और टेप्रोमेजोन डाला और उसमें जो यील्ड आई और वीड फ्री क्रॉप के बराबर आई, तो उस केस में वीड इंडेक्स क्या होगी? जीरो होगी. और लेकिन ऐसा नहीं हो सकता कि हम ट्रीटमेंट इंपोज कर रहे हो ग्रेन यील्ड जीरो हो जाए. इवन वीडी प्लॉट्स में भी यील्ड जीरो नहीं होती. सो रेंज, थियोरिटिकल रेंज में भी 0 to 100%, बट प्रैक्टिकली वीड इंडेक्स इज नॉट 100%. इट इज लेस देन 100%. इट इज नॉट लाइक दैट कि उसमें यील्ड ही ना हो, कुछ ना कुछ यील्ड तो जरूर आएगी. तो दिस इज द रेंज. थियोरिटिकल रेंज इज 0 to 100%, बट प्रैक्टिकली इट इज नॉट पॉसिबल. सो वीड इंडेक्स compare the yield of weed control treatment with the weed free crop. तो ये हमें पता चलता है कि weed index ये बताता है कि grain yield हमें कितनी मिल रही है. Then how it is related with the weed competition and weed infestation? If weed competition is high in treated plot, suppose we are applying pendimethalin in a plot and weed are not controlled by pendimethalin, suppose, then weed will offer a competition, crop face competition with the weeds. Definitely yield will be low. When yield will be low, then weed index value will be high. So in this case, weed index is high, it means we can say the weed competition is more. So indirectly it indicates about the weed competition. So weed index is calculated on the basis of grain yield, but it gives an indication of weed competition. Suppose we are applying Tembotrine, and Tembotrine is effectively controlling weeds in case of maize. Then competition will be very less because weeds are killed. Almost all type of weeds are killed by Tembotrine. Then there will be no weed competition. Then grain yield will be high, and this grain yield will be equal to weed free crop. Then weed index value will be 0 or near to 0, maybe 1% or 2%. It means low weed index means low weed competition. So weed index gives idea about the weed infestation or weed competition. So with the help of weed index, we can make idea about the grain yield reduction, number one. Number two, idea about the weed competition. So how it is calculated? It is there is a video already uploaded about the weed control efficiency and weed index. You may watch this video in numerical playlist. And here I am again giving some numerical. Suppose a maize crop is grown and we are applying atrazine, we are applying tambotron. This is pre-emergence, this is post-emergence, and suppose then other is VD crop. No weed control is done in VD crop and weed free crop, and we keep the crop weed free, and suppose we require 3 hand weeding to keep weed free crop. And the grain yield, suppose in weed free crop means the maximum yield, suppose it is 50 quintal per hectare, and VD crop it is suppose 20 quintal per hectare, and in tambotran suppose it is 45 quintal per hectare, and in atrazine it is about 30 quintal per hectare. So these are data like that. Then we can calculate the weed index. So how this weed index is calculated? So weed index is calculated with the help of the treatment. So these are the treatment, atrazine and tambotran. VD crop is not treatment because we did not apply any chemical or any weed control method. And this is the weed free crop. So this weed free crop is the base. So weed index WI is calculated as yield in weed free crop, definitely grain yield in weed free condition, minus yield in treated plot, treatment or treated plot, then whole is divided by yield in weed free crop, and then whole is multiplied by 100. So this is the formula of weed index. It is compared with the weed free. So yield in weed free situation or weed free crop minus yield in treatment or treated plot divided by yield in weed free crop, and whole is multiplied by 100. Then in case of atrazine, how it is calculated? So yield, what is the yield in weed free crop? 50. Treatment crop minus 30. What is the weed free? 50 into 100. So it is 20 by 50, that is 40%. It is 40%. This is the weed free yield, and 30 is atrazine. In case of tambotran, it is 50 means weed free yield minus 45 in tambotran treatment divided by 50 into 100. It is 10%. And in case of VD crop, actually in VD crop there is no treatment, but we can calculate the weed index to know how much yield reduction is there. 50 minus 20 upon 50 into 100, that is 60%. So it means this in VD crop is 60%, it is 40%, it is 10%. So when we talk about atrazine, and atrazine weed index is 40%. So it means in atrazine treated plot, the yield is reduced by 40% of weed free crop. It means whatever the yield is in weed free crop is obtained, of which 40% reduction is occur in atrazine. So 50%, 50 quintal is in weed free, and it's 40%. What is the 40%? 20 means 20 quintal. So 20 quintal reduction is in atrazine crop. It means 40% yield reduction is in atrazine. आप देख लिख सकते हैं कि 50 का माइनस 20 कर दीजिए, कितना आ गया? 50 minus 20, that is 30 quintal. So weed index percentage tells how much reduction is in yield compared to weed free crop. So in atrazine there is 40% yield reduction as compared to weed free crop. Similarly in tambotran, In Tambotrian, only 10% yield reduction as compared to weed-free crop. So whatever yield we get in weed-free crop, and that percent of this weed-free crop, that reduction is occur in Tambotrian. तो weed-free crop में जो हमें yield मिलती है उसका 10% रिडक्शन, उस yield का 10% रिडक्शन Tambotrian में होता है, 40% रिडक्शन किस में होता है, एट्रोजिन में होता है. In VD crop it is 60%. It means VD crop cause 60% yield reduction in yield. So VD crop indicate how much reduction is in grain yield. So here एट्रोजिन वैल्यू इज 40%, मीन्स 40% yield reduction. अब किसका 40%? 40% of weed free crop. Similarly, in case of Tambotron, how much yield reduction? 10% yield reduction. 10% of what? 10% of weed free crop. So that's why weed free crop is important. Without it, we cannot calculate the weed index. So here, Tambotron yield is more, 45 quintal, and yield reduction is 10%. It is 30 quintal, yield reduction is 40%. So now with this data, with the yield data, simply we can say in case of atrazine, yield is low as compared to Tambotron. It means weed competition is high in atrazine as compared to Tambotron. जब weed competition atrazine में ज़्यादा हुआ तभी तो उसकी yield Tambotron से क्या हुई, कम हुई. अब इसको एक बेस पे करने के लिए हमने किससे कंपेयर किया, इसे वीड फ्री से किया. तो इन केस ऑफ वीड इंडेक्स इट इज 40%, इट इज 10%. तो इफ वैल्यू इज हाई इट मींस कंपटीशन इज मोर. इफ वीड इंडेक्स वैल्यू इज लो, वीड कंपटीशन इज लो. तो हाई वैल्यू ऑफ वीड इंडेक्स टेल्स द सीवियरिटी ऑफ कंपटीशन, बट इट कैन नॉट क्वांटिफाई द कंपटीशन. कितना कंपटीशन हुआ उसको हम क्वांटिफाई नहीं कर सकते हैं, लेकिन हम एक आइडिया लगा सकते हैं कि अगर वीड इंडेक्स की वैल्यू ज्यादा हो रही है 40%, 50%, 60%, इट मींस कंपटीशन इज इंक्रीजिंग. एंड वीड इंडेक्स वैल्यू इज डिक्रीजिंग 20%, 15%, 10%, 5%, इट मींस कंपटीशन इज डिक्रीजिंग. बट दिस वीड इंडेक्स वैल्यू कैन क्वांटिफाई द ग्रेन यील्ड. तो वीड इंडेक्स से हम कंपटीशन को तो क्वांटिफाई नहीं कर सकते, बट वी कैन असेस द कंपटीशन, बट वी कैन क्वांटिफाई ग्रेन यील्ड. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, यदि इसी में हम कहें कि किसी ट्रीटमेंट का विद द हेल्प ऑफ दिस डेटा, इफ वीड इंडेक्स इज 30%, वीड इंडेक्स इज 30% of a treatment and weed free crop is 50 quintal, then find out the yield. It is very interesting. If weed free crop yield is 50 quintal per hectare and weed index value is 30% in a particular treatment, then what is the yield in treated plot? So this 30% yield reduction is in treatment. 30% weed index tell that there is 30% yield reduction in that particular treatment. अगर weed index की वैल्यू 30% है तो इसका मतलब कि उस ट्रीटमेंट में 30% yield reduction हुआ है. किसका 30%? उस yield का जो कहाँ मिल रही है, हमें weed free crop में मिल रही है. Suppose weed free crop yield is 50 quintal, then 30% of 50 quintal per hectare is 30%. 30 upon 100 of means multiplication, then 50, 0, 0, 0 means 50 quintal per hectare. So it is the reduction, it is not the yield. So what is the yield? Yield is 15 quintal per hectare reduction from weed free crop. So weed free crop yield is 50 quintal per hectare, reduction is 15 quintal per hectare, then yield is 35 quintal per hectare. So remember that, be careful that weed index tells reduction, 30% reduction in grain yield. Reduction in grain yield, not the grain yield. It doesn't indicate the grain yield. ये confusion है कि weed index 30% तो हम कहेंगे कि हमें जो grain yield मिल रही है weed free की 30% मिल रही है. नहीं, ये गलत है. जो हमें yield मिल रही है वो वीड फ्री क्रॉप की 30% रिडक्शन होकर के मिल रही है। तो एक्चुअल यील्ड कितनी मिल रही है? एक्चुअल यील्ड इसका मतलब है 70% मिल रही है। तो हम क्या करेंगे, पहले रिडक्शन निकाल लीजिए, 30% रिडक्शन। वी कैन कैलकुलेट अ वीड फ्री क्रॉप 30% ऑफ 50 क्विंटल, दैट इज 15 क्विंटल। हमने 15 क्विंटल को कर दिया, तो इसका मतलब 35 क्विंटल। तो ये एक इंडिकेशन है वीड इंडेक्स, जिससे हमें पता चलता है कि हाउ मच यील्ड इज ऑब्टेन्ड एंड व्हाट इज द सीवियरिटी ऑफ कंपटीशन। सो सपोज वीड इंडेक्स वैल्यू is 10%, 20%, 30%. Suppose then it is 10% reduction in yield. So actual yield is 90%. 20% is reduction. So actual yield is 80% of weed free. Definitely weed free. If it is 30%, so it is 30% reduction. So it means it is 70% of weed free. Or suppose weed free is 50%, 50 quintal per hectare. 50 quintal per hectare is weed free yield, weed free crop yield. Then 90% of 50 is 90 upon 100 into 50, that is 45 quintal per hectare. Then 80% of 50 quintal per hectare, that is 80 upon 100 into 50, that is 40 quintal per hectare. And 70% of wheat free, 70% of 50, it means 70 upon 100 into 50, that is 35 quintal per hectare. So it means if wheat index is 10, 20, 30% and wheat free yield is 50 quintal per hectare, then this yield is 45 quintal per hectare. This yield is 40 quintal per hectare. This one, first one, this one, and 30% is 35 quintal per hectare. And then further you can calculate. आप इसको calculate भी कर सकते हैं, दोबारा reverse calculation हम कर सकते हैं. 45 quintal is there. Suppose yield is 45 quintal, wheat free is 50 quintal. Then what is the wheat index? So wheat index is wheat free crop yield minus treated plot 45 divided by 50 into 100, that is 10%. So this is 10% with this 10%. So reverse calculation भी हम कर सकते हैं, back calculation हम कर सकते हैं. So it means wheat index tells the reduction in grain yield compared to weed free crop. If reduction is less, weed index value will be less. If weed index value is less, means reduction is low, grain yield is high, means competition is low. If weed index इसको कंफ्यूज मत होइए, इसको फिर से समझ लीजिए कि अगर वीड इंडेक्स वैल्यू कम है तो इसका मतलब यील्ड ज़्यादा है, तो कंपटीशन क्या होगा? कम होगा. वीड इंडेक्स की वैल्यू ज़्यादा आ रही है, इसका मतलब रिडक्शन ज़्यादा हो रहा है, तो इसका मतलब कंपटीशन भी क्या हो रहा है? ज़्यादा हो रहा है. सो विद द हेल्प ऑफ वीड इंडेक्स वी कैन कैलकुलेट द ग्रेन यील्ड ऑफ द ट्रीटेड प्लॉट एंड कैन असेस द competition but cannot quantify the competition. So weed index is indicator of grain yield of the treatment and can assess the competition, but weed index doesn't tell about the weed density and weed population and weed dry matter. तो कंफ्यूज मत होइए, वीड इंडेक्स से हमें वीड्स के ड्राई मैटर के बारे में नहीं पता चलता, वीड डेंसिटी के बारे में नहीं पता नहीं चलता, वीड नंबर के बारे में पता नहीं चलता, ना उनका ड्राई मैटर में पता चलता है. हम वीड इंडेक्स से ये पता कर सकते हैं कि उस ट्रीटमेंट में कितनी यील्ड रिडक्शन होती है एज कंपेयर टू वीड फ्री क्रॉप. तो दिस इज वेरी गुड इंडिकेटर टू नो द वीड कॉम्पिटिशन. थैंक यू वेरी मच.